So welcome to those who are here live at the Trent Hall in Durham, and those of you who are online from various places. It's good to welcome DGIH family and friends from around the globe. I'm John O'Quick. I'm currently adjunct professor of global health here, and I started my medical career down the road a bit at Durham Regional as a family medicine resident. At that time, Duke basketball tickets were really easy to get, but I had no time and no money. Now I have time and money, but can't get the tickets. So it's not a fair world. I love delivering babies and taking care of families and everyone from birth to the grave, as they say. But I quickly learned that I like having whole countries as patients. So I spent most of the last 4 decades in Africa, Asia, Latin America, Middle East at times, doing global health. Before launching our discussion today, a couple of logistics. After the panel, we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A, so be thinking about what's on your mind on social media. And if you're in the room, just raise your hand. If you're online, you can be putting in questions at any point, and we'll get to those later in the conversation. This is being recorded and will be posted, so don't say anything that you would regret on a job interview or if your kids or your parents saw it. So just so everyone knows. Steve Jobs, the iconic tech genius, founded Apple in April of 1976. A few years later, when he realized he wasn't a businessman, but great tech guy, he brought in a guy named Steve Scully from Pepsi, who was CEO, in order to make it a business. And Steve Scully completely disagreed with Steve Jobs' vision. The computers, that's all they had at the time was computers, would be a household product. He just never saw it as a consumer product. And fast forward 2 decades, and we had in June of 2007, the iPhone, basically a computer in your pocket. Mark Zuckerberg, in the fall of 2003, as a Harvard sophomore, he and a couple of roommates did this thing they called Face Mash. That didn't go over well, so they called it Facebook. I had 1,000 signups. Today, we got 5.5 billion people, 7 in 10 around the world, who have a smartphone, a mobile phone of some kind in their pocket. Nearly all of those people are on the internet, and the vast majority are active on social media. For better or too often for worse, social media is fast becoming the #1 source of health information and health influence in the world. And it's really hard to just get your head around what a huge thing that is, and the spread and now the impact. So I mean, it's absolutely stunning, and we really haven't come to grips to it. This idea actually came out of 2 things. One was some work and some writing in 2014 and thinking about the Ebola outbreak in 2014, which set Twitter records, 6 billion hits in one day when the Ebola patient from Africa was brought into to Atlanta. Just to give you a sense, it scared people around the world. And we saw the double-edged sword. We saw how much fake news, deadly things came, but we also saw that those trying to work with the epidemic would follow the social media. They would tailor their messages based on both reinforcing the right thing and trying to counter the other. So that was a major event, and that got us thinking about this. This particular group that you're going to hear from is mostly part of a co-author group that has done a paper on what we think of as the double-edged sword of social media. That it has incredible opportunity and potential for huge benefit, but also for incredible harm as we've seen, especially with some of the recent news from CDC and so forth. So we've got three, most of you probably have seen that, just the huge impact in 3 years on the mental health of teenage girls, not only from social media. So we've got three goals for today. Briefly highlight the growth and reach of social media platforms. We're not going to get into chat, GPT and AI and other things. It's the core platforms we want to focus on. And we're going to, number two, we're going to look at kind of the typology of benefits and harms. And number three, and most important, what we can do in practical terms to reap the benefits and mitigate the harms. So we're going to do that from three perspectives: the companies, what companies can do, from a point of view of what governments can do, and from the point of view of what users themselves are going to do. So great panel. First, let me introduce Werner Vegas Vera from Yucatan, Mexico, a certified nephrologist. Big difference between the, never mind, you know. He's at the Mexico Institute of Social Security and the Christus Muguruza Hospital, Faro del Mar, and he serves as an advisor to the Nephrology Social Media Collective. I asked everybody for a fun fact. His fun fact, which is not so much fun, is he learned recently about clever internet scams for academics for trying to get your money for fake conferences. So in getting a really nice invitation that goes bad. Next to me is Zain Jafar, a third-year undergrad at Duke, and completing a pre-med track and studying a self-designed major on health equity in U.S. health reform. He was a student in my Duke Focus class, became a TA, and is now the lead author on this paper. A fun fact: he was an all-state golfer in high school in New York. Next to Zain is Phil Napoli, who's the James Shepard Professor of Public Policy in the Sanford School, which is a great partner. We co-teach a program with them. And he's director of the DeWitt Wallace Center on Media and Democracy. Also, a sports fun fact: he was a three-time state racquetball champion. When we get a chance, I'll introduce you to pickleball. And finally, from the middle of the night down under, Jocelyn Brewer, based in Sydney, Australia, who's a registered psychologist with a special interest in the psychology of technology, part of the Cyber Psychology Research Group at Sydney, and a council member for the Center for Wellbeing. Australia has done a lot on digital well-being. Fun fact for her is she was a finalist for an Australia reality TV show, Big Brother, back in 2002. And my fun fact is that I can't finish anything. So in college, I took off to spend a year as a mental health counselor and had the time and money to go sport parachuting and did about 10 jumps. And basically everything that could go wrong did go wrong sometime in those 10, except the ultimate of the chute not opening. It did finally not always on time open. So let me turn first to Werner. Actually, let me turn to the okay, here we go. We've really gone through the big numbers on where we are and just the reach. And as we tried to parse out the benefits and risks, we looked at four buckets. For public health providers, for the general public, for special wellness needs, and for mental health. So to kind of walk us through the mapping of the benefits and risks, let me turn to Werner. What have been the main benefits and risks in this area?
Well, can you hear me over there? Are we okay? Great. Yeah. So, well, I think the benefits and the risk is related to the people in itself. For example, most of the bad side of the social media could be related to the dark side of the people also. So we are having a lot of interactions, like people who interact with others who share the same beliefs, and they start having this like they start having conversations and conspiratory theories in the dark web. That's one of the harms. One of the most important harms that I believe is leading where everything is going in the social media. But we're having a lot of benefits. We saw a lot of outside your network interaction with peers. For example, the healthcare providers, you can have, as a healthcare provider, you can have a lot of interaction. Basically, inside Twitter, on Twitter, is the #1 science platform for us. So you can find a lot of information like really quick. You don't have to wait for any conference or anything. So it was really good for us to find Twitter was a safe space for anybody. Facebook is having better applications right now. Facebook is doing right now application, for example, for blood donors. If you want to be a blood donor, you can find an application for that. And they are constantly trying to fix and have more things of this for the healthcare. For example, for the general public, in the key point is that everybody can keep up with the health, but it's mostly depending on the individual responsibility. So we have to teach the next generations how to obtain this or how to navigate through the health news, and to have opportunity to read more about anything that they want to, but with an objective. Because if we don't have any objective, we can have what we call cognitive overload. That is a risk for the general public. When you have a lot of information and fake data, you can start having this cognitive overload, and you can start being a little bit of aggressive. You don't know what to do. You start feeling a little bit of anxiety and depression. So it's important for the general public to know what's going on in the social media and use this as a really good tool. But we have to know what's going on. In the next slide, we can have also benefits for special health wellness. Of course, we don't have cost related to sharing information with our peers. So that's great for the social media platforms. The government also can have this free information transmitted to all the population. So it's good for us. And in the risk area of special health and wellness needs, maybe we need more fact checkers. Some of the platforms are doing their best to try to take down all the fake news, but it's hard to take all the fake news. So if we have another crisis or any other pandemic, maybe it's going to be a hard, it's difficult to manage all the information that we are having for all the wellness that we are needing for the population. And we need to take down this all this information, but it's hard. And I think one of the most important things that we were talking about is the mental health, because the mental health, of course, we are having more communities that are creating resilience for our people, but we are also having this, we are finding that all the people is trying, not all the people, but groups of people are going to the deep web or the dark web. The deep web and the dark web are places that you can put your ideas of conspiracy, and these dark web and deep web platforms, you don't have that much resonance with the government, so you can speak freely more things. And also there's a black market for vaccines, for example, in the deep web and the dark web. So we are having really good things in the platforms, but we are starting to see another things going on in the dark web. So I think that's one of the most important things about the harms or the risks that we are having in our population.
Thank you, Werner. Good mapping of the benefits and risks. Good jumping off. Zane, how are you thinking about the risks part and the harm? How does social media contribute to harms?
Yeah,
I mean the companies. How do the companies fit in here?
yeah. So I think Vern did a great job of sort of outlining the benefits and harms, and in terms of the harms, we can sort of trace them to being caused by social media companies in two ways. we looked at the algorithms and as also we looked at the decisions made by these companies. So algorithm is sort of a buzzword that I just thrown around a lot. But what it means in relation to these platforms is that they're the way that posts are sort of ranked on a user's feeds. And in the context of social media, the algorithms are engagement based, which means that they're sort of driven by posts that will generate the most likes and comments, interactions. And so what we found is that this sort of system of engagement-based algorithm often leads to polarization of sentiment, and it can sort of drive users into echo chambers or homophilic networks. And we saw that there was a big tie to public health from there. We noted in our research that we found during COVID, this sort of polarization of sentiment led to users being more likely to be exposed to content related to vaccines that would confirm their beliefs. So we saw a lot of confirmation bias. And another thing, I guess, associated with these algorithms as well is that built into them is a strong component of addiction. And I think what we noted in our paper is that addiction is at the hallmark of a lot of these social media companies' business models. And sort of those, to keep users coming back, the algorithms sort of feature components that sort of trigger classic neurochemical responses that we see in other forms of addiction. So it is a matter of sort of keeping users coming back. And then in terms of the second aspect would be the decisions made by social media companies, which we call in our paper sort of patterns of inaction and sometimes deliberate negligence, where social media companies are often aware of the harms. Facebook's own internal research, for example, revealed that they are aware of a lot of the mental health issues associated, especially with teenage girls, and along with some of the stuff associated with political effects of their platforms, the effects of their algorithms and content promotion, but at the same time, continuing to sort of have a sort of laissez-faire, hands-off approach. And I think thematically kind of stretches to this idea of market-driven epidemic, and you have a sort of for-profit company operating in a manner where they're trying to sort of generate the most profit and make the most lucrative decisions, which often means sticking with these algorithms and maintaining this addictive nature of these apps.
So are they making any progress in trying to mitigate their own problems?
Yeah, I think that we often kind of can get ahead of ourselves and say it's all bad. But I think the key point I'd make is that social media is not inevitably bad. It doesn't cause inevitable harm. And that these companies are starting to, with a lot of the pressure that's been mounting the last year last few years that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, are starting to sort of make new decisions and develop new tools that we think are promising. So we've seen a couple of things in the last few years. One was a viral circuit breaker that was used back in 2020 during the election cycle with a fake story related to Hunter Biden. And what we saw during that tool is the tool basically cut off the algorithmic promotion of a misinformative story. So we thought that was super encouraging. We've seen during COVID and the election sort of flagging and fact-checking misinformative posts. We've also seen Facebook and Instagram introduce sort of non-algorithmic feeds, which make the feeds sort of chronological rather than being based on this sort of engagement-based algorithm. So those sorts of things have been very positive. And one thing that we noted in our paper is that we encourage companies to sort of continue to use those tools, not just in times of crisis, which is when they've sort of been rolled out, but consistently. And then the last feature I sort of hit on is this idea of pre-bunking, which we hope will be more further introduced in these platforms. Pre-bunking, basically, for those unfamiliar, is a strategy of exposing users to factual information before they're introduced to misinformation. And the research has shown that such exposure prior to exposure to misinformation it is much more impactful on users and is much more likely to promote sort of positive health benefits and productive behaviors. So that's one thing we encourage. So there's definitely steps being taken in the right direction. We just sort of encourage more consistent action. And I think what will be discussed further in the panel will sort of indicate how that action can come about.
Okay, good. Phil, turning to governments, what are governments doing right now to try to oversee this whole amazing growth of social media and its mixed impact?
Sure. I'll start with the US at the federal level. The short answer is a lot of talk, not a lot of action so far, but that may be about to change. And some of what I'm going to talk about bears directly on issues related to health. But obviously, when we're talking about government regulation or policy in this space, there's been a range of concerns, that are connected, whether it's privacy or hate speech, sort of political disinformation, things of that sort as well. But things that some of you may be aware of, right? We may be seeing a complete ban on TikTok coming on the horizon. And obviously, if you're my age, you say, yeah, no big deal. If you're one of my students, that is the end of the world. But that's, that goes to larger issues around data privacy and security and things like that. But there's also a lot of legislation that has been proposed, but none has actually been passed. And it read all recently related to modifying Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Some of you may be familiar with Section 230, what Section 230 is, but the important aspect of it is that it provides social media platforms fairly wide-ranging immunity from legal liability for the content that they post. And one of the things we've seen, there's currently a Supreme Court challenge around Section 230. Doesn't look like the Supreme Court is going to look to roll that back. At least that's what the prognosticators are saying. But we have something, for example, introduced recently called the Safe Tech Act, and this would modify Section 230 and carve out some of the areas where there wouldn't be that kind of immunity around issues of cyber stalking, online harassment, and discrimination. So one could imagine a variety of ways, and there have been a variety of other proposals over the years that seek to carve out different areas of that Section 230 immunity from liability. And so that's things that we've seen happening at the federal level. Now, what's really interesting is how much has actually been happening at the state level. And you might be thinking, how can states meaningfully regulate global social media platforms? And you would be right. There's something fundamentally problematic about Texas or Florida passing legislation that's intended to impact how Facebook operates or how Twitter operates, et cetera. But 34 states have at least at this point have proposed legislation directed at different aspects of the operation of social media platforms. We've seen Texas and Florida, for example, and as you can imagine, this becomes highly politicized. In some cases, it's about trying to address issues like the perceived suppression of conservative viewpoints. So we've seen Texas and Florida try to impose legislation that would require these platforms to operate essentially as common carriers. And if you think about what that could mean for how health misinformation circulates on a platform, the idea is that a lot of these, even the basic content moderation and curation activity that you were describing, imagine that their ability to do that being eliminated, which is a bit scary. But we've also seen some specific legislation directly focused on protecting children. So in California, there is actually some legislation being proposed that would essentially make these platforms liable for lawsuits if it knowingly harms children under the age of 18. So parents would be able to sue even if they could demonstrate that their child had become addicted, thinking about the addiction model that you were talking about. And again, those would represent, though, fairly, according to some interpretations, pretty dramatic changes in terms of Section 230 protections, though, as the proponents of the bill would argue that they're not really dealing with any kind of particular content, specifically just about the extent to which the platform itself is addictive or is causing harm. In Minnesota, a bill was proposed but ultimately rejected that would have prevented platforms from engaging in any kind of algorithmic filtering, algorithmic content curation as it relates to children. But that failed to pass. We're also seeing actually cities and states propose, file lawsuits against these platforms for alleged harms against children. So it's an interesting thing that we're seeing in the U.S. where we're actually seeing more movement at the state level, and the question I think is whether that would spur any more meaningful action at the federal level. But real quick, we can look internationally to places like in the UK where they're proposing what they're calling an online harms legislation, which is actually very focused on protecting children and making these platforms liable, making platforms have a duty of care as it relates to protecting children from harmful content. But as this proposed legislation has been negotiated over the months and months, it keeps getting scaled back, and the extent to which it applies to the broader population keeps getting pulled back. So anyway, that's the tip of the iceberg on this.
And this pushback is classic. We haven't talked about the dynamics of market-driven epidemics, but one of the dynamics is companies are doing harm. They know they're doing harm. I mean, they're doing a lot of good, but they're doing harm. And governments or the public or whatever try to call that out, and the companies sort of dig in and try to moderate whatever so that it doesn't bite in, because it is a business. Jocelyn, the tea is caught up with you over there. What are some of the most important skills and habits that users can benefit from to take the most of social media, but protect themselves from the harm?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. Look, the actions that we can take really kind of emanate, I guess, from using this technology in our skull, which I think sometimes we forget is the most important and powerful piece of technology on the planet still. A lot of my work has been framed around these micro skills or these habits, and using this technology well and developing this technology to really look at what are the skills that we need for digital well-being and for media literacy, and for what I call, staying human in this hugely technologically saturated world. I developed, I guess, I work a lot with parents and young people. So I, about 10 years ago, thought, oh, look, how we actually conceptualize this in a way that doesn't feel like a burden is to think about the analogy with food. And digital nutrition is really a positive slant on that, where we can think about what is contained in our digital diet. What are some of those kind of dark patterns that are involved in designing and developing platforms like TikTok? And then how we, I guess, push back against some of those designs. So within even, just picking up on what the other speakers have said, something like TikTok, where most recently down here in Australia, they've announced that there's a 1 hour limit for people who are under 18. Now, I think that's a really good plan, but many people are quite pessimistic about where this is coming from. And obviously what young people are then going to do is suddenly become over 18 in order to be able to access more TikTok and then, override that sort of system. We also know that in China itself, they claim to have solved the problem with gaming addiction by making everyone who uses games actually register, and you all only get an hour a day. So there's all of these really interesting, things happening in the background to try and then support us, usually manage screen time, which to me is kind of like managing, counting digital calories, so to speak. So we don't sit down with our, for you guys at lunch today and go, I've only got 20 minutes of food time. We actually think, oh, what am I going to eat that's kind of a bit of a balanced diet that I can get my hands on, that's cheap, that, is convenient, and all of those sorts of things. So within that digital nutrition analogy, it's really about considering, I guess, in principles of intuitive eating. How am I connecting with what I'm looking for, what kind of information I want, what kind of connection I want. Often I sort of jokingly say, and sometimes not so jokingly, say we're actually not addicted to our devices. You are not addicted to your smartphone. You're addicted to the connection that you're getting from whatever you're doing online. You're dependent on, and we all are dependent on, connection and community and a sense of belonging. So when we start to dig beyond, I guess, some of the micro habits, I could talk about the micro habits for hours, but what I'm interested in is moving from productivity and a lot of that kind of use your time well into what's my purpose on the planet? What am I here to do? And getting young people to connect with their future and to connect with some of the global challenges that we have here. When I hear you talk about, you know, what America might be doing, what your states are doing, I think about in Australia, we have an office of the e-safety commissioner, who's in fact an American ex-Twitter employee, Julie Inman Grant, who's at the UN at the moment, talking about a lot of these issues, that we do have this great opportunity in Australia where you can report online bullying as adults. We even have an Online Safety Act where we can report some of those really gross interactions that we have, not even just on the dark web, right? You don't have to go to the dark web and find this awful portal into yuckiness. It's happening on Twitter right now. Twitter's one of the most gross platforms. So yeah, really using this kind of sense of what is my purpose, and does the activity that I'm doing right now feed into that purpose? Can I be really cognizant to what we call information disorders? So if you look at the work of someone like the First Draft, it's an organization that really breaks down misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, and looks at the process of constructing and then transmitting those forms of information disorders. So as you can tell, I can talk about this for hours. That gives you probably a bit of a picture of my work and how multidisciplinary it is. But yeah, I guess to answer your question, it's to turn on this technology and be really cognizant of some of the machinations that are happening on all of these different levels, to try and basically get our eyeballs, you know, the attention economy, to get our eyeballs into these platforms in order to advertise to us and to sell us more stuff.
So Jocelyn, you see people in all ages, and one of your core things is digital well-being. Have you seen? I mean, when anything new comes out, I mean, my analogy is that people learn to use technology mechanically before socially. So it will pick up, you know, phone and start talking. Or in the old days, the phone would ring, they'd pick it up, they'd start talking. Before they knew who was on the other end. So there's mechanical learning's easy. The social learning is harder. And you've been at this for quite a while. Do you see any sort of a two-part question? Do you see an evolution? Are people getting smarter or dumber about how they protect them? How they take advantage of the benefits and protect themselves from the harm?
Look, I wish I could say, yes, everyone is a lot more, you know, media literate and digitally savvy, but you're right. And one of the things that I talk about to parents is those social emotional skills that are required for your young person to, you know, open their first smartphone and start using it well, how we would hope, you know, in a good way, to kind of put it in binary terms. That kid does not come preloaded with those skills. That's what the brain is taking, you know, up till about 25 to develop some of those higher order thinking skills, the social emotional awareness, and then deal with what happens with computer mediated communication or technology mediated communication. So and we often see, I had a conversation yesterday with a parent who has an 11-year-old on a platform called Roblox, which is designed for kids over 13. She was like, I just can't get him to understand what you can share and what you can't share. And I'm like, yeah, because his brain's just not ready for that lesson. Time is what he needs, and trying to get him to learn that lesson too early, it's just cognitively not going to go through. So I wish I could say, yes, we're really acing these skills, but increasingly parents just feel overwhelmed. And I think, having come out the other side of the pandemic and a lot of the lockdowns and stay-at-home orders that we had, especially on the east coast of Australia, the kind of screen time did go up, and the ability of parents to monitor what that activity was and how that was kind of the quality and of the content has really kind of shaped a chunk of young people who are coming through. And yeah, just needing those social skills does take time. And it also, the other aspect to it, I guess, is modeling. So as a parent of a 6-year-old, as somebody who only got their first smartphone at 32, I kind of noticed that and talk about we haven't dealt with this before. We're dealing with this ourselves as we're trying to parent these, you know, very complex creatures who look like fully grown adults, but have these highly underdeveloped brains and make some really weird decisions sometimes. So yes, there's so much work to be done. And because that the rapid change in digital technologies means we have to constantly be learning. So I actually have another project that I created in the pandemic on Zoom with a New Yorker who I've never physically met, called Metaversal Wellbeing, which is all about considering what are some of the challenges coming our way with the metaverse, Web3, a much more immersive VR, AI kind of, you know, version of the internet, which we are going to blink and then be asking all of these questions, not about TikTok, but about what happens in the metaverse, which no one can quite work out who's building it, who'll get there first, what that's going to look like exactly. Roblox is probably the best example of a beta version of the metaverse that we have at the moment.
You're giving us some reinforcement and some more words. We're turning to open questions now, and I see Emily Smith back there, who's a professor in emergency medicine, and did an interesting thing. She's actually my office mate, but I'm never in the office because I'm that young. But tell us about the friendly neighbor epidemiologist and what you've experienced some of this.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I started at the beginning of the pandemic to be, I'm an epidemiologist, and my mom and real life neighbors were asking questions about the pandemic. So I started this mainly for my mom and those friends, and it went viral unexpectedly. And if I had to go back, I would have probably stopped that part of it. But it, you know, it was really interesting because we were in Texas at the time in a highly conservative area talking about the pandemic. So when it became political, it became like, so everything you're talking about, a big, like the bad part of going viral, we saw, and we were trying to counteract. And I say we, I mean, there were a lot of us working, Gavin for sure on Twitter. I made some great friends that are all female that we were just working day and night on Facebook, and we saw the bad part of it. I mean, it's just like the dark web. I don't think people give enough credit for of that part.
So you've actually gotten into one of the questions isn't the dark web something different than social media platforms? What's the interaction?
Me?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not the expert in it. I think there's a lot of talk between it.
Yeah.
Because you'd find your name on a list on the dark web that was transmitted through Facebook or Twitter or the Washington Post.
Okay.
And so it was all connected in very weird ways. I think it's deeply connected.
Okay. Any questions in the room? I've got some here that have come in online, but yeah, Chris.
Hi, everybody, Chris Farr. Excellent panel. I have a question that also in some degree is a comment, and that is that, you know, I think we all think of the internet writ large as essentially a global public good. You know, the other side of COVID was, of course, that many states rolled out vaccines through an online portal, and that discriminates against the elderly. They just can't do it. I mean, my parents in their late 80s, they cannot do email. They just can't. They can't get through the algorithms. If an elderly person doesn't have a younger person with them, sitting there helping them do it, it became impossible to get immunized, right? So we had a major flub in understanding who doesn't have digital access and who does. But actually, the internet as it's currently constructed is not a global public good, right? It's run by companies. And the companies have a very different agenda. They may have an agenda about, like, Facebook pays a lot of attention to blood donation and they promote, and that's a big part of what they do. But at the end of the day, they're companies. And we've just seen with a mainstream media company, just a perfect example of this, where it turns out in the filings that are going on in this court case against Fox, that everybody at Fox knew that Trump's claims of the stolen election were baseless, including Rupert Murdoch, who just said that under oath. Oh yeah, all that was crap. Why did they continue to push it? Because they had a huge decrease in their viewing audience when they called the Arizona election for Biden. Right? And it caused a panic because it's pulling eyes away. And that tension is right at the heart of Facebook. We fought them, you know, the Burmese junta used Facebook to promote a genocide against a Muslim minority in Burma. They continued, the general had his Facebook page open for 11 months after the genocide. And Facebook had one excuse after another for why they couldn't do anything about this. And they finally took it down just before the 1-year anniversary. And that's because they're a for-profit entity and not a global public good. And that tension is not going away. And I think, you know, when you think about global health and digital access and the ways in which we want to expand people's ability to use these wonderful tools to get healthcare and monitor their healthcare, we have to be incredibly careful about the financial aspects of all this. It's very, very critical. And of course, you know, in many, many low and middle income countries, there's only one provider. These are monopolistic systems, and you have essentially one choice.
So let me ask, put Phil on the spot for a minute, and then I want to come back to a couple of these questions. Do you see any help? I mean, there are a variety of problems the world is faced that they've made some progress on the international level by coming to some agreements. Do you see any, back to Chris's point about, you know, every country and every company is on their own. Do you see, so just sort of imagine, do you see any potential for any kind of global conventions on social media?
Ooh, it's so tricky because every country's approach to free speech can be so different, right? I mean, there's so many variables across which you know, countries, you know, legal regimes, cultural norms, all of that can differ. We've had efforts, we've had you know, the Internet Governance Forum, right, which is, you know, we convene every few years. I would do it years back, and you know, one of the conditions that was placed on you know, for participation, or you know, some you know, government bodies would say we'll participate as long as nothing that comes out of this is actually binding. You know, I know, you know, then we can have a free flowing discussion. So it was, as long as it's toothless, we will take part, right? But can I just follow with something, you know, quick point Chris made very important, which is when we think about how, if we compare how we let the internet develop and how we let these social media platforms develop, and look historically, for example, how in contrast we developed broadcasting in this country, where we thought about broadcasting as a public good from the beginning. And the entire model of how that technology, you know, so, you know, there was a regulatory framework for its development very early on. But if we think about something like I mentioned, like Section 230, if you look at what its motivations were from the get-go, they were about making sure that the digital space could develop economically as rapidly and with as little inhibitions as possible. So a completely different philosophy guided how this, what we hope to think of as a public good, developed versus how, you know, how we saw broadcasting develop.
Careful what you wish for. It really developed 2.9 billion on Facebook alone.
Yeah, but can I just add to that for a second, just from the perspective of, we're talking about capitalism, and I don't think we should be surprised that people who make shit tons of money, and that's the technical word, want to make more money, and that divide that keeps growing. And that is late stage capitalism, and that's one of the problems. And we are all beneficiaries of dispossession of First Nations people. And I think we kind of have to go back and look at that it started back with some of those kind of ways that we treated people whose land we took. So, you know, fast forward, I don't know, 200, 250, 300, 500 years. And here we are kind of going, oh, how did this happen? Well, I think there's a pretty clear line when you look at human history of this kind of behavior from a small group of people who stand to benefit. So that's my controversial kind of, you know, pace on that.
But it often gets couched in how we, you know, do not restrict, do not impede the benefits of this technology from reaching everybody. I mean, that, whether, you know, sincere or insincere, it's amazing how much our policymakers are susceptible to that line of reasoning.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the kind of fathers of the free market, they were not envisioning a free for all, a winner takes all free for all. Adam Smith, Wealth and Nathan said was supposed to benefit everybody, and now the invisible hand's only benefiting the rich. So that gets into the whole market driven epidemic.
Yeah, and Tim Berners-Lee, I guess, wasn't expecting when he created the internet for this to happen. And I think there's a big movement to kind of take back the internet for good. And that's why there's so much concern and focus on designing a ethical a metaverse that really learns from the lessons that we've already had. Again, the eSafety Commission down here has a safety by design framework, and there's lots of different ethical design models, which I think we need to kind of take the focus off, you know, one direction and thinking about how do we design for good going forward and have this as, you know, gold standard.
So I want to, there are a couple of maybe more frontline questions that have come in. One of them, and I think Werner, I'll look to you. The advice for, what is your advice for health experts confronting misinformation on social media? Should you take it on directly? Any observations on how to respond to misinformation?
For misinformation is I think it's a big trouble, and we don't have any answer yet. Maybe it depends on the platform, because the thing that we are all thinking, the other doctors in Twitter, is you need to smash down when you find misinformation. You need to take down that quickly. But it depends on the administrator of the platforms, because you need to flag the post and then they have to check the post. But maybe it's out of hands how you can manage the misinformation. I think it depends on basically the provider and the platform, because it's really hard for you to manage as one people. Maybe if you are an organization, maybe you can fight that back with more information and talking about what is correct. But it could be really hard when it is only you as one person trying to take down this information.
Okay.
But there are lots of tools, I guess, within social media that help you be able to report information. I know that, you know, during the pandemic, and you know, the AI that already exists in these platforms to be able to flag particular types of content and put content warnings, or to directly pull it down. I mean, if you have the technology to put a content warning on it, you also have the technology to simply block it at its kind of source. So some of these companies maybe aren't using the full extent of their capabilities in order to prevent that misinformation, because again, you get more people piling on, spending time getting ads in their eyeballs and hopefully clicking on those ads and buying things. So it's, you know, getting points back.
Yeah, talking about the difficulty of this process of taking down content, especially doing it at this scale, right?
Yeah.
And not one country has ever required these platforms to demonstrate that they can content moderate at scale, you know, as a condition for operating. You know, Facebook was operating in Myanmar with not a soul who spoke the language. And you know, if we think about how, you know, we would never, and we were, you know, cigarette analogy has started to come up. We can think about all the relevant analogies, but we don't, you know, just let, you know, drugs go on the market and then go, hey, let's see what happens. I mean, maybe sometimes, you know, DJI folks might get better than me, but just that degree of permissiveness for something to operate, you know, unprecedented scale in which content was being distributed and circulated. Just, you know,
Well, that's the regulatory and editorial frameworks, right? It's supposed to be media, but it's not edited.
nope. And everybody, you know, every government fell victim to the notion that this is technology and this is technology policy. This isn't media, and a media policy lens was seldom, if ever, until very recently applied in this context.
But it's also going backwards, because when Elon Musk took over Twitter, he sacked lots of moderators. He actually sacked the trust and safety team, a range of really awesome experts. They were like treated incredibly badly. So we're going backwards before we're actually moving forwards in some examples.
So Zain, a question on the preempting information, and that goes along with the kind of moderating. It's kind of preemptive in a way. How do you implement that on a large scale? and really work it into a system?
I think it's a question I've sort of grappled with myself, because I think that embedded in a lot of our discussion has sort of been, what do we see the role of social media and social media companies as? Are they, as you said, just merely a sort of a platform where people can sort of post without any regulation? Should they have more of an active role in sort of policing? So when it comes to this idea of pre-bunking, where social media companies would sort of put out factual information to sort of pre-expose users. And again, like I said in the initial part of the panel, that's sort of been demonstrated to have really positive benefits. It comes with a question of, is that sort of overreach? And I think that there'd be a significant body of users that might question sort of that being featured on their feeds, and sort of going to the app to sort of see content or enjoy connections that they're looking for, then sort of encounter this information that maybe they're not. On the flip side, that we have seen the harms and know that they're considerable, and know that misinformation sort of is able to run rampant, and know that doing the sort of pre-bunking is really essential to sort of counteracting that. So how that sort of plays out, I guess, is a little bit outside of my scope. But I do think that sort of identifying and being aware of the benefits that we've seen from pre-bunking, I think it's important that these platforms start to move in that direction. But again, like I said, I think seeing how that sort of actually plays out from a practical role will be sort of interesting development in the future of these apps.
So one of the, I'm keeping my eyes out if anybody's got, wants to come in with questions. But going back to ultimately the user is the one that's going to have habits that get them on, get them off, and the question is learning, and particularly learn skepticism. So I shouldn't say this, but my daughter's father-in-law sent me a piece around. I shouldn't say who it was, but anyway, it showed President Obama and his wife pledging allegiance to the flag like this. The hand was on the right, and the caption was, "Don't they know how to do the Pledge of Allegiance?" How long do you think it took me to totally disprove that? About 15 seconds. I looked at 6 pictures on the web, and Michelle Obama's hair was always parted on the other side. So you knew the image had been reversed. And it's those mental habits and the whole idea of learned skepticism. There is an International Fact-Checking Association, which actually is pretty sensible, and they have some pretty straightforward things about reading articles. 2 habits. One, don't trust the headline. The other is any article on current science that doesn't hot button the original, the source, I don't read. And even if it looks like from incredible stuff, and this was habits from COVID, where it's just crazy, and the headlines totally misrepresented. That happens on journal articles too, by the way. I did an editorial many years ago about that. But I mean, I think thinking more. I'm kind of preempting maybe the fact that I'm going to give everybody a bite at the apple, but more, what are some of the learnable habits, and when do we start teaching those habits in order to really be able to ferret out the truth and be skeptical about things that just don't resonate. I think okay. So many corporate. One more question, and then I want to give each panelist a final bite at the apple on just sort of parting thoughts. I kind of feel like we're kind of saying, well, there's some sense that it's all beyond us, but I mean, we can't just let this thing at the pace it goes go on its own. So something's got to give. Many corporate counterclaims many corporates counterclaim based on parental neglect after posting a 25-year-old requirement for access to the platform. Sorry, I'm reading the questions, but I don't understand.
I think what she means is that, you know, could we just kind of say that you have to be 25 before you use social media, is my reading of that. In which case, I think, you know, all the 13-year-olds who want to be on Snapchat are suddenly 25. And the difference between faking your age to say if you're 11 and pretending you're 13 to get on the app, and 11 and then pretending you're 21, is there are rules about advertising. So you can't advertise cosmetic procedures to people under 18. So if you fake your age and you pretend you're 19, you're suddenly, you know, getting ads for cosmetic surgery, and you shouldn't be. So I think one of the problems that with this age kind of thing is suddenly people just fake their age. China got around that by making everyone have a user ID for the internet. So you literally have like a social security number in order to access the internet. I don't think we want to kind of go to that sort of level. Don't know.
Should mention I proposed legislation just last month here in the US that would prevent anyone under 16 from using social media.
Oh, okay. So final comment from each of the panelists. Let me start with Werner from Mexico. Any parting thoughts for the group?
Yes, thank you. I have to say, we have to remember that we are part, maybe we are the final product for a lot of companies. We have to think of that, and we have to take care of our kids and our communities, because they are seeing us as products of attention. So we need to take care of that. And also, maybe one suggestion for the future, maybe we can push so these platforms can certificate doctors, so we can do this flagging like quickly, and we can be like another like we can help like the platforms to take down all the information, but with certification, maybe it's quicker for the platforms.
Okay, find ways to respond more quickly to making accurate information. Jocelyn?
Look, I used to be a commerce teacher in high school, and I think the lesson that we'd always kick off with was caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. And I think we probably need to do a whole bunch more due diligence before we allow our 11-year-old to pretend that they're 13 in order to access platforms because their friends are doing it. And that takes a big kind of cultural change around how we parent and how we acquiesce maybe, and the styles of parenting that have become more, I don't know, popular, I guess, compared to like when I was growing up. I wouldn't have a very different response. So yeah, there's just a lot of education and understanding and promoting really, again, this part of technology and its amazing ability to make decisions based on good quality information, and teaching things like media literacy so that we know how to seek good quality information from, you know, recognized and trusted sources. That's going to be a key kind of skill for most of us, to be able to, you know, recognize the sources that we can trust and have that healthy level of critical thinking.
Trusted source is key. No.
I just reiterate a point that came up earlier, that, you know, from a regulation and policy standpoint, if we can't figure out a way for some notion of you know, public interest obligations to be baked into how these platforms operate, and you know, and not sort of accept the knee-jerk reaction to that automatically represents some kind of violation of the First Amendment. There is space to navigate there.
So keep at it and we'll find a solution. Zane?
I think along those lines that it's important that we find a way to sort of police these apps and regulate them in the proper way, because I think that one of the things that I brought up, and it was actually an idea that came up from Michael Penn himself as running the event when we were writing the paper, is that these apps, again, like I said before, don't cause inevitable harm, and that they are tools which currently are sort of under the reins of for-profit companies that are sort of being used nefariously, but that our goals in sort of discussing what users can do, what healthcare providers can do, what governments can do with regulation, is to find a way where we can sort of reap the benefits while mitigating the harms. And in doing that, I think that the goal of our paper and what we're really trying to peddle is that we can really get positive public health impacts if we're able to sort of tackle these harms that we've brought up today, and make sure that we're sort of framing social media as not something that's inherently bad, but something that we can sort of find a way to harness the power of, given, like we said at the beginning of the panel, the extensive reach of it.
I think that's a great summary. So thank you to Werner, to Jocelyn, to Phil, and to Zane, and to everyone who was here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay up, Jocelyn.